Canada Post's financial struggles are renewing calls for the company to expand its business into the banking sector. In countries with what's known as postal banking, people can open checking accounts, take out mortgages at their local post office. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says this service would actually lead to lower fees for customers, maybe generate some revenue for Canada Post. But some experts are questioning whether postal banking would make sense in this country. So for more on what it could look like here, we're joined from Ottawa this morning by Ian Lee, Associate Professor at Carleton University's Sprott School of Business. Before I ask you whether or not you think this is a good idea, let's talk about how postal banking works. We haven't had postal banking in this country since 1968, so we'll need a refresher. How does postal banking work?
And we never really had postal banking in the full sense of the word. I covered this in my thesis. We closed it in 1968 because we were down to just a small handful of customers. Basically, we took people's deposits in pennies and dimes and that sort of thing. It was not a bank in the sense that we understand commercial banking, where I worked for 9 years, where you bring deposits in from across the country, and then you lend it back out to people to buy a mortgage, to buy a car, to run their business, operating loans for small, medium, and large businesses. We've never had that. We had sort of a very small, stripped-down version of that. There are countries, Switzerland is one, France is one, Japan is one. Every one of these countries started them over 100 years ago, when commercial private for-profit banking was not well developed. It was not mature. So governments intervened because of essentially a market failure. Private banking wasn't working as they wanted it to work. So they got there as a first mover advantage, basically. And the second point, very importantly, is these countries are very small. I call them postage stamp countries. And I'm not putting them down, but I've driven from the very bottom of Germany to the very top of Germany in 12 hours.
Right.
I drive to Thunder Bay to see my brother, and it's 19 hours, and I haven't left the province of Ontario. Forget the other 9 provinces. That's how huge we are. So we have the smallest densities in the world. They have very high densities.
Right.
And so that's why these analogies to Europe or these small postage stamp countries are not good analogies. A better comparator is to the United States, because we share the same continent, same time zones, same geographic scale, and so forth.
Well, let's take a look at the banking industry that does exist right now in this country. Canada's banking sector dominated by what's known as the Big Five. That's RBC, TD Bank, BMO, Scotiabank, and CIBC. Together, they have a market share of more than 86%. So how challenging would it be for Canada Post to even try and compete with the Big Five?
I think it'd be impossible. And I do not consult to this industry. I worked there for 9 years, and I had wonderful times in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a great career, and then I went back to school. But what I want to get across is we have some of the most powerful, large, successful banks on the planet. Each of our banks is over $1 trillion in assets. It boggles my mind. The Royal Bank is approaching $2 trillion. Secondly, Anne-Marie, these banks have all been in business for over 100 years. They go back to the origins of the country. BMO, where I work, goes back 100 years before Canada was created. They know banking up, down, left, right, diagonally, 18 ways to Sunday. And that's why the big American banks and the big French banks and the big Swiss banks and the German and the Austrian banks have not come into Canada, because they know that they will not succeed. ING, the huge Dutch bank, came in, a Netherlands bank came in, and they exited after a few years. They couldn't cut it. And so this idea that there's an unserved segment in Canada, 99% of Canadians have bank accounts. And Anne-Marie, I just want to get one more fact out, because nobody's talking about this. The CUPW says, look, there's a segment of Canadians that don't want to deal with those big bad banks. Okay, I buy that. And there is that segment. And they say we can serve that segment. Well, that segment has been served for over 100 years by the credit union movement. Right. These are nonprofits across Canada, 1,500 branches, $300 billion in assets, 30,000 employees. And the idea that we're going to subsidize Canada Post to go in and basically try and put the credit unions out of business is going to produce huge blowback in all the communities across Canada that have credit unions.
So without even asking the question, I'm going to gather that you think, no, this will not work here in this country.
Well, can I put one more thing out?
Very quickly, yes.
CUPW doesn't realize taking deposits in is an expenditure. It's not a revenue. A bank has to pay you and I interest on the deposit. So that means the government would have to spend billions to create the digital architecture and then spend billions more sending CUPW back to school to learn how to become lenders to lend the money, because it's a very complex, challenging, demanding industry. And they don't have any competencies or experience in that industry, and they'd be taking on 5 of the most powerful banks in the world.
Right. CUPW, just for people at home who may not know, is the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Ian, great to talk to you as always. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.